Good day, everybody, and welcome to another episode on the Lessons from the Game podcast. I'm joined, as usual, my co-host, Ben Pegna, and today we will be recapping on the episode of the legendary Owen Franks. All Black legend, machine in the scrum, devastating in the collisions, and we're going to take some time today and debrief, which we felt was really important in that episode. But before we get stuck into that, Ben, brother, how are you doing? You good? Good to see you.
I'm good, G. Yeah, I'm good. It's been an exciting week, hasn't it? It's been this episode with Owen has been pretty, I think, transformational in sort of how we've been talking about stuff, and it's been incredible. The feedback has been incredible, so I'm excited to be talking about it today.
Yeah, awesome. I just want to say thank you to everybody. It just shows the amount of respect he has worldwide. Our social media page on Instagram was kind of flooding with messages, people requesting the link to the episode. Some people very adamant, like, when am I getting the link? And it was great. So we just want to say thank you to everybody that gave feedback on the episode already. I think like once it was launched yesterday morning, I started receiving feedback. So that was unbelievable. And we also want to thank Owen for taking the time and sharing some insights and really being open. You know, he wasn't hiding anything away. He was very open, sharing knowledge. And that will definitely be one for the books, you know, especially if you're a front row rugby player, a coach, a scrum coach. It's just brilliant. But before we get stuck into that, Ben, I just want to ask everybody that is listening or watching our podcast, please, to help us grow the show and have unbelievable guests like Owen Franks on the show, please share our podcast with your friends, but also like and subscribe to our channels on all the various platforms on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. So, Ben, people don't realize 108 test matches for the All Blacks. It doesn't happen just like that. We had a discussion earlier about it. If you can just give a bit of context to our audience.
Yeah, I thought it was an amazing interview with Owen because of, he's a double World Cup winner. It's easy to go think 108 test caps and you just reel it off. You go 2 World Cup wins. But then when you break it down, he played 108 times for the All Blacks over 10 years. And you're playing 12 to 14 test matches a year. So he's been ever present pretty much for 10 years. To do that from the age of 21 for the All Blacks, and then be a double World Cup winner during that time means that you are consistently one of the best, top 3 best operators in your position in the world, consistently. So to do that in any field is incredible. To do that in rugby, where the attrition rate is so high, where there is so many unknown factors against you, so many variables, all the competition, all the other elements, it's when you step back from it and you think about it, it's incredible. It's actually incredible. And he was this close to going to the 2019 World Cup, and it's debatable, arguable that he should have. And who knows what would have happened if he had gone there as well. So, quietly, one of the best players of all time. It's pretty hard to argue against that.
Yeah, Ben, I totally agree with you. I think what people need to understand is, as a prop playing at that level, at the age of 21, internationally, if I'm not mistaken, back in the day, scrum laws were different. There was the full-on engage. We spoke about it in the podcast. There was loads of intensity, way more space, and nothing to take away from the younger generation today, but it's almost easier today in a way to start with scrummaging, even though you mentioned that the scrum has evolved. It's more about the isometric load, where there was loads of intensity and violence on the engage. But we often hear about the Dan Carters, the Richie McCaws, all these amazing players. Owen Franks definitely is right up there with him. To play 108 test matches for All Blacks, to be always present for so many years, you mentioned before, like almost about 12 test matches per year, always being available, and the amount of time he spent on the field. He was playing long minutes, he wasn't going off the 40, and he was a fit guy. But I think that is also a result, Ben, to all the efforts and the work he put in that started at a very young age, started grafting, started at the age of 14 with his brother Ben. And I know that you were really geeking out about the training. So tell us more about your take on about the training and the preparation of Owen Franks.
Yeah, just that intentional training that he did from a young age. So there's loads of elements that we're going to dive into today. He was clearly a student of the game and still is a student of the game. And that started at a young age. He had his older brother to look up to, who guided him with some of his training, as did other people like Scott Hansen, who he mentioned is one of his mentors. And we've spoken about having a mentor. He mentioned it, Owen mentioned it several times, and then understanding what was working for him and what was better for him. So he talked about Ben, his older brother, doing more powerlifting type of training, and Owen was strong and doing those basic core lifts that you need to do. But then he found that the Olympic lifting, those faster movements like the power cleans, the snatch, those types of movements, actually gave him a better transfer into the game, and they suited him better. And so he evolved his training. So that intentionality, but whilst watching people talking, he talked about watching a lot of footage, watching a lot of games, being a student of the game. It's just, I found that fascinating, because people would go, "Oh, that guy's just a big guy. He's this. He's almost as if you're quite lucky, and it's all just luck, and he's genetically blessed." But it's this intentionality behind what he did to pursue a goal, and he had a vision, and he went for it. I love that.
And he actually enjoyed his training. I mentioned in the episode that when we would be playing in New Zealand, I would go to the gym and it would be the off day, do a bit of bike or karting. He'll be there doing weights like one of the only All Black players. And he said, that was fun for me. And he enjoyed it. And he was also honest. It wasn't like, boom, he was the hardest worker from the start. He learned to love training because he had this intrinsic motivation to really achieve something great, which was unbelievable. Back in the day, I trained differently. I was a very weirdly built player, had skinny legs, this big, massive upper body. But my key was fitness. I was maybe not the strongest in the gym. I couldn't do Olympic lifts. I didn't have the mobility for that. But my thing was running. I used to love running, doing extra cardio at 6 a.m. in the morning. And I knew exactly what I needed to do to have that physical but also mental edge. But Ben, we skipped a step here because you spoke earlier about one of his mentors or someone that helped him in the game, talking about staying in the middle. I think it was Scott Hansen, if I'm not mistaken. If you would like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, and it's come up a few times with some of the people that have reached out to us. They've asked us questions about, they've said, "How can I do this?" And I've just had this setback. And often the advice you and I give people is like, when you get this praise and some things go well, it doesn't suddenly make you a world champion overnight. You just have to keep doing what you're doing, keep following your processes. And equally, when someone is overly critical and you drop a couple of balls or you miss a tackle, it doesn't make you the world's worst player either. And Owen talked about staying in the middle. He didn't go, when he got a bit of praise, he didn't go over the top. He didn't think, "Oh, I'm going to be an All Black tomorrow." But equally, when he made a couple of mistakes on his learning, when he was learning on that journey, he didn't, berate himself and think, "Oh, I'm rubbish now." He just stayed constant and in the middle. And when he received that, I think that's brilliant advice. That was one of his takeaways and one of his key lessons that he learned from the game that he mentioned to us. I think that's brilliant.
I think that's something you need to manage in the game. We all experience pressure. I think I was definitely there as a player, Ben, when I was like on top of my game. And sometimes the arrogance got the better of me. I'm man enough to acknowledge that. And luckily I had people around me. I told, "Hey, G, calm down a little bit. All right, you need to, like we say in French, de gonfler tête, let that head come down a bit, reduce the swelling. It's very important. You need to also learn to prepare with humility. You need to respect your opponents. And I definitely paid the price at certain times in my career where I was overconfident and I didn't do what was necessary, didn't tick all those boxes, and, I would have poor games. But having that humility and managing, your performances when you're doing well, you're like, you know what? Doesn't matter the fact that I was last week on top of my game, that this week will be exactly the same. I need to respect the process, but also those low moments. When you're consistently losing and not getting the results, it can be tough. You can start to doubt yourself. And that's what I like about just staying in the middle, not that you don't want to be overconfident, but you also want to be down in the dumps every single time. I think that's very important from my experience as a player and a coach. And I've played in teams where we had long losing streaks as well. And also recently now as a coach, we've come out of a tough period, and a lot of learnings in there. Staying connected, that's important, believing in the process. And I think he learned that from a very young age because he had injuries, he had setbacks, and that helped him to deal with it. But Ben, you mentioned earlier student of the game, and I think this could potentially be a podcast, but we're going to touch base on it. Being a student of the game, I realized that a lot of rugby players all over the world, not everyone, but a lot of rugby players, especially rugby players that are playing professionally, they don't always watch the games. They're not studying the game. When I'm working with players online, that are young players that want to get better at the game, then I would ask them, what did you see? They have no idea what they saw when it's talking about a scrum. It's like, obviously they're there to learn, but you kind of like need to be obsessed with rugby. We've spoken about this before. When I was a youngster, if there was 5 games available on telly, I would watch it, especially with Super Rugby days. Watch early in the morning, straight through the day.
100%.
So what does it mean to be a real student of the game?
Big question, but I think you're right. I think it's almost a podcast by itself. But
Yeah,
in
I'll
that
make a note of it.
situation, what we have found is that it's more common now that players do not watch a lot of rugby. You hear that quite often. And what you just spoke about, I recall being in South Africa as a player, and our game wasn't until later in the afternoon, and watching every single one of the Super Rugby games back to back until your game in the afternoon or evening, or whenever it was, because you'd watch all the New Zealand and Australian based games, and you knew every single player. I could have named every single player in every single team and every single squad. So and that's one element of it, because you're learning from what other people do. You're seeing what different techniques are used in New Zealand or in Australia. You're understanding, oh, why does that guy, for example, Owen spoke about how the game, adjusting his game and things like that, and that became a part of it. And he knew that he was playing you in his first game again, and Bucky's Butter was behind you, and he knew what was, because he had studied the game. He was a student of the game. It wasn't like, oh, who am I rocking up against today? So there's so many elements to it, but I think it's really important that we talk about knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses. If you're coming up against somebody, what are their strengths? Where am I going to try and, what don't they want to do? How can I make their day a bit harder? How can I try and expose them? There's loads of elements to it, aren't there?
Yeah. I think it comes back to where he said they were, with the mindset they had with the All Blacks. There were games they pitched up, they knew they weren't gonna lose. He said it was borderline arrogance, if you can call it that. That was his words, and that came down because they did the work. They were prepared for their opponents. They did their homework, did the analysis on their opposition, which is very important. And you got to do that. Being a student of the game, you need to know what your opponent's going to be doing. I remember Victor Matfield back in the day, and you will eventually have him on the podcast, by the way. Whoops, let that one slip. But anyway, so he would watch hours and hours of lineouts so that he could outsmart and outwit his opponents. He knew exactly what they were going to do when they twitched their body in a certain way, when one hand went forward or which foot went forward. He knew exactly what they were going to do. And that's why he was one of the best lineout jumpers and callers in the game, because of the analysis he put in, the work. He was a student of the game. And it's the same with me when it came to scrummaging. And there was a time in my career I was, I won't say arrogant, but I was just living in this space where, like, you know what, I'm good in scrummaging, it's okay. Until I got that hiding, until I had an embarrassing moment where I knew, okay, you need to step it up. And that's when I became a real student of the game, learning, wanting to get back my place in the Springbok team. Lost my place in 2009. I remember Sid Tusa, he spoke about the All Blacks beating South Africa, or no, South Africa beating the All Blacks on 3 occasions in 2009. And I was sitting there, I wanted to jump in, but like, I didn't play. I was sitting in the record stands. But being a student of the game just allows you to give perspective, but also learning the ability to be really objective, because
Mm.
sometimes you think you're good, but you're not really that good.
Yeah,
And you have
yeah.
this perception in your mind. You think, I had a great game. But if you go watch it, like, actually, I didn't. So that's important. When we say student of the game, look, being objective, being how can I say, taking a
It's
step
almost that
back. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost that growth mindset, isn't it? It's that willingness to be humble and go, I don't know everything, but I want to keep learning. I want to keep improving. I want to be master my craft, and
Yeah.
that's an element. And so quite often you hear how those guys training, oh, how those guys recovering. I remember, oh, they're doing breath holds underwater, and they're doing these types of things. Okay, well, I'm going to try that. It's constantly trying to push the envelope, isn't it, and get better every day. So that's definitely an element of it as well.
Yeah. Ben, I think one thing that I just want to touch base on, I think, which is very important for our audience and listening, there's so many great gems that Owen dropped in the podcast. You really need to I would advise you, take out your notebook. All right, write it down, listen again. And when I'm listening to podcasts or audiobooks, Ben, if I miss something, I go back. And quite a neat trick, which I've learned lately. I normally write stuff down in my book, but also with my phone, quickly taking notes on them. Then I upload it somewhere else. That's another story. Still need to show you that process, by the way, and allows you to recollect everything. But I think the most important thing that Owen mentioned is that when it comes to training, your training needs to evolve with the game. I fell into that trap when I was in Toulouse because I still believe my 3,100-meter sprints a Monday morning after a game, that's what got rid of the stiffness. That's what gave me the edge. But Super Rugby was only 6 months. And then you're in top 14 where you're playing for almost 11 months of the year. You're playing two tough competitions, European Cup, top 14. And I would keep on pushing. I tried to keep the same mindset which I had as a player back in South Africa, playing Super Rugby, but not knowing that in South Africa, we had all these little mini breaks in between. You were well rested at times. And I didn't always adapt my load. And I'd end up paying the price where I was overtrained.
Yeah, yeah. I think his intentionality, how he talked about training, for example, he did the squats and then he practiced, he had a band waiting for him and he would go and do the setup straight away, how he worked out what worked for him, what he wanted to do, and then he added those tweaks to his training. He talked about at the end, towards the end of the pod, he talked about how he was probably in his peak when he was 24, around that stage. When he reflects back, it's really interesting to hear him. I'd love to ask him more questions about that because, and I wonder how he got to that stage and what that looked like for him, what that means for him. But yeah, I think the best players, they evolve their game. They change what they need to do. Maybe they lose a meter of pace, and so they become a better distributor, and they bring in the other people around them. Yeah, I thought it was fascinating with Owen. I think one of the big takeaways for me is, well, just it's not fluke, it's not an accident, it's not coincident that he became as successful as he was. You could hear it with every single one of the parts of the conversation. There was thought process, there was a rationale, there was consistency, there was a clear process that he was following. It was really, really interesting. So, as you said, I really encourage people to listen to it.
I think it comes down to where he said, or where you actually said that intentional practice. I think that's very important. We speak a lot on this podcast about being obsessed with your process, trust the process, and consistent efforts and grit, being relentless and doing what is necessary. And, intentional practice is probably similar, but for me, it's like whatever you're trying to achieve or what you're doing, that there's intention behind it.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
us doing this podcast. Why are we doing this podcast? We connected on Clubhouse back in the day in COVID. We realized we enjoyed the space, talking, sharing our knowledge, and we were learning from people as well. And it's something which we're passionate about as well, Ben, giving people insights into the game, educating our the people around us and young and aspiring rugby players and coaches. You got to put intention behind. I'll give an example. I'm in the process of putting together a nice little project for the Scrums bin. I've always wanted to put together like a proper website with all the resources for young rugby players, props to learn more about the game. But obviously, being a full-time rugby coach, that's my main things, my main job. So I've always been putting it off, always been putting it off. It's too much work. It's taking too long. And, we're talking about intentional practice. So what I started doing, okay, What is this going to look like? What type of content do I want to put on there? What do the players? I started doing research, speaking to players, speaking to coaches. What do you need? What would you like to see on it? And started making notes. When I have time or I see something which can be great or a topic that can be relevant, then I will just make a note of it, upload it to my database. And that is something I've been doing over the last few months. And today actually was our day off. So after our paddle game, I took like a half an hour, looked at it, and I did the outline. And honestly, I'm loving what I'm seeing. But that comes down to intention. It's a different example. Maybe that's more
Yeah.
applicable to the parents that are listening. Maybe you got a bit of project on the side, something that you want to achieve. But if you're practicing something on a daily basis or being intentional with your efforts and why you do it, it can really take you a long way.
Yeah, hundreds. There's so many good points he made, and I love that as well. That intentional practice. He talked about how the game has evolved with the hit when you guys were talking about it being a different game now, and how it's more of an isometric
Scrums
battle.
used to
And
be scrums, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, and now he's talking about, well, that's put more stress on the core, or that's because you're having to transfer someone the power through for a longer period of time, and that fight might be for 6 or 8 seconds or whatever it is. And the thought process that that you guys as scrum coaches, as leading people in this space, think about, what does that mean for my training? What's the intentionality now? How can we change? But also, how can we dictate to the opposition then? I just thought that was fascinating. And the other thing, one of the things that we spoke about was we talked about aggression, and I love the way he talked about, basically, I don't think he used these words, but he talked about embracing everything he was good at and what his strengths. So he talked about, I love smashing people, so that's one of my strengths. I might not be the best handler, I might not be the quickest guy, I might not have the big, etc. But this is what I do bring. I bring expertise and world-class performance and this and this and this. And he outlined them, and he knew what he was good at, and then he became world-class at those things. So, and one of them is bringing aggression in that contact space. And that's brilliant, really insightful, really, really good.
Ben, I would just like to add on to the aggression topic there because I think it's something that fascinates me because, how do you develop it? Is it something you're born with? Is it something internal? There are different philosophies, and I definitely believe that the two of us, we need to take some time and actually research this topic a little bit in terms of how can you develop aggression, because there are rugby players out there, they really want to give their best. They are training hard, but sometimes when it comes to the game, the aggression is not there. That happens. We've seen it at all levels, amateur, semi-professional, professional level. Aggression today is an integral part. It's always been an integral part of the game, but I think you also have to be aggressive in order to protect yourself. But what I liked about Owen, what he said, like, for him, one of the biggest reasons he was aggressive because he loved the contact, he loved the collision. And you can't judge others who don't really love the collisions because they bring something else to the game. They might be playing in space, they are lightning fast. But I think what he said, the biggest regrets he would have if he didn't dominate the collision was that shame. You could see it meant a lot to him, those personal battles in the
Yeah,
collision. He didn't want to experience that shame. He didn't want to let down his teammates. And aggression, I do believe it is internal. It's not so much about wanting to hurt your player. For everyone's different. In my case, I wanted to hurt the opposition. I wanted him to feel pain. But it could also be you want to dominate that space because you want to get that go forward for team. You want to help your team. You want to be an asset to your team. But Ben, we're getting off track. Anything else you want to add up before jump off? Because we got
yeah.
an
Just fine.
amazing guest lined up.
Finally, on that one, just an add-on to the last point you made, that I love to follow up and have a follow-up conversation with Owen, because I also think that's the standards of the environment as well. And does that breed the success? Is that one of the key ingredients to breed a successful team? Because he didn't want to let his teammates down. He knew this are the standards, and nothing. They probably wouldn't even had to have said anything. They just look at him, and so that became an intrinsic thing for him. I don't want to let my teammates down. But that soon quickly became the standards. And you and I we've seen that both sides of that fence, where you have teams where there's no accountability like that, and other teams where You don't have to say anything, and people don't want to let each other down because you become like a bond, like of brothers, almost like when you at the Bulls. So that's fascinating as well. But yeah, I really encourage people. And just, sorry, finally, the feedback. I got some great feedback today. What
Yes,
a
please share.
player that a player that I've mentored a bit. He's an age grade international player at the moment. And he just said, yeah, our Scrum coach shared this with the team today because they just thought this was really insightful and how he talked about X, Y, and Z. And I thought it's really good. It's encouraging for us because that's why we do this pod, to help people, help young players, help young coaches. But it's, really would love people to share this and get it out there so that we can help more people. It's that simple, really, and yeah, it was really encouraging to hear that feedback.
Yeah, I think when we're always talking about being able to reflect, and this is also one of the reasons we do these short form episodes, especially when you have a guest like Owen Franks. If I look back now, when I think what we learned as a podcast host is that we try to keep our episodes like the 1 hour limit, so it's easy, it's digestible for our audience. But realizing now, we should have just gone on. So what if it was a 2.5 hour podcast? Like, I listen to 2.5, 3 hour podcasts because I want to learn. There's something valuable. We see it on these shows like the Joe Rogan show. Like, sometimes there might not be guests that interest you, but sometimes there is a guest that interests me. And okay, I'm going to listen to this. And whether it's your Diary of the CEO podcast, which is 2.5 hours, but there's a topic that interests me, or the Andrew Huberman, there are all these various podcasts. And I think that's the biggest or learning for me, is that when we do have his guests, Ben, that are unbelievable, an hour is not enough. They
Hour
have
flies by,
so
doesn't
much
it?
to share. An hour and a half,
Yeah.
2 hours. So on that note, to everybody listening to the short form today, if you think we should have gone longer on the Owen Franks podcast, please send us a DM on Instagram, drop a message or comment on the YouTube platform, on the Spotify platform. And please, we also want to engage with you. So if you're on Spotify or YouTube, where the comment section is available, leave a comment. Let us know. If it's crap, it's crap. Okay? We will listen. We will work hard. We will evolve. But Ben, before we sign up, anything last you want to add? Because I need to go because I'm flying solo on the next pod. So
Yeah, that's right, bro.
wish me good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, good luck, bro. No, that's all good, man. It's really good. I just encourage everybody to listen to it. It was really good, enjoyable to speak to Owen as well.
Okay. All right, Ben. Thanks, my man, taking time in your busy schedule and to have this short form. Really enjoying our little weekly chats. I think at
Cheers,
the
G.
moment I'm speaking more to you than my missus. All right, but that's something I need to work on. But yeah. Thanks to
Cheers, bro.
everybody that's
Thanks.
listening. I'm getting ready for another podcast, someone who's a specialist in the area of nutrition. So stay tuned on that. I'll be sharing shortly who that is. But most important, like and subscribe. We need to grow the show. We need your help so we can have unbelievable guests and have unbelievable in-depth conversations like we did with the legendary Owen Franks. Have a good day or evening wherever you're in the world. Ciao.